I consider myself to be libertarian. The entire internet as we know it is absolutely broken. The entire, I think monetary system is broken. What these guys, print off at the Federal Reserve is not money.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Today we have with us Tim Picciott, the founder of Crypto Self-Direct and wealth advisor with Innovative Advisory Group. He is a forerunner in the field of crypto wealth management strategies and provides advanced financial planning with a particular focus on IRA, crypto IRAs, and 401ks. And we're delighted to have him here today as our guest. Good day, Tim, and welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you on, Tim. I understand that you see yourself as a libertarian and you subscribe to Austrian economics. What is it about the libertarian movement and Austrian economics that made you subscribe to them?
Well, I grew up in upstate New York and went to actually a liberal arts school. And then I pretty much realized that everything that I was being taught was basically a lie. And actually in 2007, 2008, I took a class on the Federal Reserve where my classmates actually won the national competition. And we were told like how that basically we could never have another recession again. And that, because of the dot-com bubble that we're in the clear. And this is while we were technically going into recession. So then, I graduate 2008 as the world's collapsing. Started my career the day Lehman Brothers collapses. So that's September 15th, 2008 was my first day in the financial business. And so immediately I started trying to unpack what was going on, trying to reverse engineer the financial crisis, and then realized that basically everything I taught was a lie. And then, one day I met this guy who looked like the singer Rob Zombie, this really kind of rough looking guy. And he tells me the Federal Reserve is private. I thought he was full of crap. He sends me down this rabbit hole of, I watched a film called Freedom to Fascism. That led me to The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, which for anyone that has not read that, I'd highly recommend reading that. And then that led me to Ron Paul, which then led me to the libertarian movement. Although I will say I'm not super thrilled about the Libertarian Party per se. And so I actually changed. I was originally called the Libertarian Advisor, and I switched it over to Liberty Advisor just because I was, I consider myself to be libertarian, more like voluntarist anarchist, but I do not necessarily agree with everything that comes out of the parties because I'm more about ideas, not about parties. But it's just, hey, I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't want you telling me what to do. And as long as what I'm doing isn't hurting you, then I feel like I've got a right to do what I want to do. You've got the right to do what you want to do, and just don't try to take my money and force me to pay for anything. And I think that's sort of like a golden rule, sort of basic concept. But for some reason, we're stuck in this, we've got these two-team ideologies. And so I guess that's a little story, of how I kind of came about to it. But I was able to escape the matrix being in New York, and somehow a millennial from New York was somehow able to, see kind of past the system.
With the Austrian economics and also the libertarian thinking, they view gold and silver pretty much as sound money. For yourself, how do you view gold and silver, and are they barbarous relics to you?
No, of course not. I mean, I view it as money, and what we have, in our pockets, right now is actually technically currency. It isn't money. So that dollar bill, which is actually a Federal Reserve note, is strictly just a means of communication, a means of currency. And so if you look at what the definition of money is, and I don't have it in front of me, but gold, really is actual money, and silver is actual money. Whereas what these guys, print off at the Federal Reserve is not money.
Tim, you advise clients on how to set up crypto IRAs, and that must be a very niche area right now, I'd assume. But before we get into the discussion of crypto IRAs, can you share with us your background and how you yourself got into the crypto space?
Okay. I mean, I gave the little story already about how I, was on the class and won the national competition on the Fed, and then ended up meeting the guy who told me the Federal Reserve was private. That led me to eventually discovering who Ron Paul was. And then a lot of the early crypto adopters were some of the Ron Paul crowd. And so I knew what it was early on, but I sort of, probably like a lot of your listeners sort of outsmarted myself of thinking, hey, gold and silver is money, this cryptocurrency stuff, that's not really money. And then one of my good friends, Ernest Hancock, who I was actually on his radio show right before this, he was probably the second radio show host in America to start interviewing all the crypto guys way back when they had like the 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza days. And so he was connected with all these guys, and I was at a pool party at his house with it was actually like some former libertarian presidential candidates there, and I mean there was sort of like a who's who of the liberty movement at this party. And he's like, hey Tim, we got some rich crypto guys, how do they actually get their money out of the system? Well, it's one thing if you've got a few $100 or got a few $1,000, but what if you invested 1,000 and now you've got 10 million. Well, how are you going to get your Lambo, or how are you going to get your house without getting killed on taxes? So I helped come up with different types of charitable trust strategies where a lot of people don't realize when, all the, the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts and all these Zuckerbergs, supposedly, quote unquote, give away their money. They don't really give away their money. They put it into charitable trust to get huge tax breaks. The charitable trust pay themselves. The money that gets paid to themselves is offset by the tax breaks, and it's a whole big sort of scheme. But I didn't make the rules, so don't hit the player. Hit the game. So I didn't make it up, and I realized this could be of great benefit to the crypto space. And then as this is also kind of unfolding, I end up discovering that there was a company charging 15% upfront to put money into crypto IRAs. I thought that was basically highway robbery, and decided I would try to come up with a competing system. And kind of long story short, as all this is going on, and I'm one of the only people that actually got burned by the price of Bitcoin actually going up. So I'm probably very unique in that, whereas I was setting all this stuff up before the run up. So this was like August 2017, before it was, a household deal. And, next thing I know, everyone's talking about Bitcoin. The broker dealer I was with banned every single advisor in America from talking about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies right before I was supposed to go to Acapulco, Mexico to give a talk in front of probably 500 Bitcoin millionaires. So I ended up having to quit a job where I was making over 6 figures residual income. Then the state of Arizona held on to my paperwork for almost all of last year, forced me to be basically unemployed for almost all of last year. And now I'm, rock and rolling and bringing in more money than I've ever brought in before on a, monthly basis in terms of new clients coming in. And it was because I had that conviction of, I'm not 5 years old. I don't need you telling me what I can and can't tell my clients about, especially when I've, known about Bitcoin since it was $1. But what really got me fascinated about it wasn't the fact that it was this fake money you could trade back and forth with. It's the fact that there is all these other applications for this, where in the future you're going to have a stock market that trades through the blockchain, where you're going to have let's say a token that represents Apple. And instead of buying Apple stock like you do today, and you've got to wait 1 to 3 days to have your funds clear, it will be something where you trade a token. It will trade instantaneously. It will cost probably a fraction of a penny. I mean, you can make I did a Bitcoin Cash transaction the other day that was like 1/1000th of a penny to make the transaction. And so, today, I mean, there's so many middlemen in the system, there's so many parasites in the system, and that blockchain is going to be a way to take out a lot of these parasites. And getting back to the stock market, I see a world where instead of buying the S&P 500 index fund, what's going to happen is you're going to buy all 500 stocks. And the reason you'd want to do that is in case, let's say 20% of them lose value in any given year, you can sell just those losers. And so now your account balance is growing up, but you've also have some losses accumulated over here. So that way when you sell, you can basically offset some of those gains by losses. And it will probably cost, maybe less than $1 to do so once these systems roll out. Whereas now it would cost, even at $5 a trade, would cost you $2,500 to do it. So there's a lot more than just, this fake money being transferred back and forth. And it was once I discovered Ethereum and that there was all these other use cases for Bitcoin, and it wasn't just the money aspect of it, which, people are free to use, whatever. And I think in a libertarian world, they should use whatever money they want to use. And so if you want to use currency that's Bitcoin versus currency that's Federal Reserve note versus silver versus now they have, cryptos that are actually backed by gold and silver. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting things going on. And it was the greater application of how this could help free humanity is what really got me interested in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's very interesting, particularly with Bitcoin and or crypto and precious metals. In fact, the views about cryptocurrencies and precious metals they can be somewhat polarizing, and those who are pro cryptos, they may not like precious metals. Those who like precious metals may not like crypto. But where do you stand, and how do you view cryptocurrencies?
I mean, a lot of my clients have both. Where in our portfolios we have, I encourage them to hold gold, outside of portfolios, like to actually hold it themselves.
Yeah.
But for some people, they don't want to. They just want whatever the easiest thing to do is. So we have clients where a lot of our clients have gold and they have cryptocurrencies. And so I'm not one that's, sort of like not to name drop, but, like a Peter Schiff would be in the, hey, it's got to be gold and nothing else but gold or silver camp. And then you've got, I guess I'm sort of more of the counterpart of, I think it makes sense to have both. I mean, you don't have to, it seems like people are just trying to stake their claim. And there are people that are very territorial and only want gold or silver. And there's other people that only want cryptocurrencies. And I think you can have a world of both. And especially if, the things that go on with the Federal Reserve, if eventually what hits the fan. I mean, you don't need a very big percentage of either one of them as a percentage of your holdings to, at that point, maybe be able to mitigate some of the disasters that's going on.
I heard you say fake money a couple times. Is Bitcoin money, or is it only a currency for wealth transfer, or a vehicle for wealth transfer, and does it have intrinsic value?
I mean, I guess the intrinsic value, I've heard one of my friends who says, he considers it his silver moving device of, hey, if you're trying to get, let's say you're flying out of the country and you've got a stack of silver where you could sell the silver for, let's say, Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, then you pop out on the other side and go use it to go, rebuy your silver over in Singapore or somewhere else. And I'm sure there's other ways to do that. But, we're seeing, just the other day, I drove from Phoenix to San Diego and we had to go through internal checkpoints and I'd never left America. So I'm driving along the highway and you have internal checkpoints inside the country where they've got dogs going around your car and it's Department of Homeland Security. And it kind of came out that a lot of that stuff is eventually it's trying to train people for gold and silver, potential confiscation. But I do think it's more of a currency, a way to transact value. I guess money is really sort of in the eye of the beholder. So if some people want to view it as money, it's certainly money. You can go and pay for things, whether it meets the actual definition of money. That's sort of I've seen both sides of that debate. I do have some problems philosophically with Bitcoin because it did, as some people might know, it did split off where it was Bitcoin, then Bitcoin Cash, and then even that, and that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, I do know quite a bit about the inside baseball on that, but it's ultimately, I think one of the pitfalls people could find themselves into is that you're going to see governments having their own, like Goldman Sachs.gov crypto coin, or the JP Morgan actually just announced they're having their own institutional coin. What a joke. And so what I think people are going to beg for is their own government approved crypto. And then at that point, we're going to be even worse off, because then we're going to have a completely traced, surveilled crypto where, the government can shut you off. And it's sort of like in G.O. Griffin's Creature from Jekyll Island, when Paul Warburg said we shall have one world government. It's only a matter of through consent or conquest. And you're going to see these people begging for it. So I'm advocating more of the private cryptos where they can't track you, they can't trace you, they can't surveil you. And it's not because I'm doing anything shady. It's because, why do you want to walk around with like a number tattooed on your forehead of what your bank account balance is? If you're paying your employees in Bitcoin, do you want your employees knowing how much is in your bank account? Do you want them to know how much you're paying the other employees? Do you want to know how much you're getting your different supplies from your suppliers? I mean, there's so many different reasons of why you'd want to use private blockchains. So I'm a lot more bullish on the private blockchains, a lot more bullish on the there's going to be internets in the future that are going to be based on these technologies. I mean, the entire internet as we know it is absolutely broken. The entire I think monetary system is broken. And it's really going to be interesting to see how these things shake out the next few years.
Yeah, a few months back, we had Danielle DiMartino Booth, who used to work at the Dallas Fed. She told us the Fed, for national security reasons, will probably have to come out with their own crypto coin. So we'll wait and see how that's going to play out. But yourself, I assume you own cryptocurrencies yourself?
Absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay. Moving over to cryptocurrency IRAs. Are cryptocurrencies specifically listed as a permitted IRA asset?
There's nothing that's really actually specifically permitted. There's actually only a list of what they don't allow. And so what they don't allow is going to be collectibles and life insurance. And so if you were to have a collector's coin, not a Bitcoin, but just like a collector's coin, you can't have that inside of an IRA. Or if you were to have, let's say, a collectible wine, you cannot have that inside your IRA, but you could have a winery inside your IRA technically, because that's a business, just not a collectible. So the IRS doesn't go around saying, approving what you can and can't. It just has a list of what you can't put in there, and the list is pretty short. Yeah. But then there's all sorts of other traps you can find yourself into. So, it's our opinion right now that mining, you cannot have your own like mining rig inside of an IRA, because because the electricity you're using, that would be deemed as a contribution. And so there are, those little nuances, things like real estate inside of IRA. You got to be careful with that as well, because, people, want to get way too cavalier about what they're doing of, hey, I'm just going to put my own house inside of an IRA and I'm going to live in it. Well, wrong. You can't do that. Or else I'm going to go, change the light bulb in my Airbnb that's in my IRA. Wrong. You actually can't do that as well. And so there's all sorts of rules and pitfalls people can find themselves into. But no, the IRS has not specifically said whether you can or can't put cryptos inside of an IRA.
Can you explain how a cryptocurrency IRA works?
Yeah, so in the most basic sense right now, I don't want to say it's the easiest way, but probably the most proven way right now, and depending on when you listen to this, so if someone's listening to this in the year 2022, it's probably going to be completely different. But right now, essentially what you're doing is you're having a lawyer create an LLC. The LLC is then owned by your IRA, and then you as a manager then can basically choose what you want to have inside your IRA LLC. Now there's probably about a dozen other steps in between that you've got to do in order to make sure the flow of everything goes correctly. Like some people think that, I can just take my current Bitcoin and put that into an IRA. Well, you can't do that either. Yeah. And so there's all sorts of, it has to come from cash and but essentially, yeah, once you have the IRA LLC set up, you can, at that point, you can sort of go to the races. And by working with somebody like myself, an innovative advisory group, we're really there to help hold people's hands through the process where they don't have to necessarily play a guessing game. They can, ring us up, send us an email, let us know different questions they have. And we do advise people before they make any moves that they do run it by us first, because it might seem like, oh, well, that's, really innocuous move. Well, that innocuous move might cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you mess something up. So you want to make sure you're working with people that know what they're doing and that you're staying out of trouble.
Okay. You mentioned creating an LLC. Is that necessary to create that LLC?
I mean, right now, so the trick is eventually no. And right now there are places like BitcoinIRA.com where they, not to plug them or anything, but they definitely don't want to plug them, but they're charging 10 to 15% up front. Wow. And so they are working with someone that's custodying the actual wallet and not the problem with custodying the wallet, though, is that then there's 3 private keys and you need 2 of those private keys in order to unlock your funds, so to speak. So it's sort of like you have like a nuclear submarine launch. You need to have, 2 different keys, in order to like have this, launch or whatever. And so in this case, generally speaking, you're only holding on to one of the keys, and then there's 2 other keys outstanding. So, just like if you don't have, 2 out of those keys, is it really your money? So what I'm willing to say is that the only way to ensure that you're holding on to both the private keys or you're holding on to the private keys, it doesn't have to be 2, is to have this, what they call self-directed IRA LLC process. That's the only way to really ensure that it's your money, that you're the one holding on to the keys. Because where people find themselves into trouble is, they do things like they have, they leave their money on the exchange, and then the exchange gets hacked, and then all of a sudden, boom, thanks for playing. There's all your money.
Tim, I've heard you mention the phrase Roth IRA conversion with regards to the topic of crypto IRAs in your videos. What does that mean?
Yeah, so one of the things that people, especially, the more hardcore libertarians and anarchists, one of the pushbacks they have is, well, hey, why don't I just cash out my IRA? Why don't I just cash out my 401k and just buy Bitcoin or just buy gold and just be done with it? So that is, obviously, probably, the 800-pound gorilla in the room question that I get on a day-to-day basis. And so if you were to cash out your 401k, cash out your IRA, you got to pay, usually it's a 25% income tax withholding. Then you've got to pay a 10% penalty. However, if you were to do a Roth IRA conversion, there's actually a way to avoid the 10% penalty. And then, so now essentially there's, 10% more Bitcoin you can buy. The other difference is the gain at that point is then going to be tax-free legally versus a taxable gain if it's not held inside the Roth IRA. So I did the math a few years ago, and if somebody bought Bitcoin on, obviously all the disclaimers of, past performance is no indication of future return, and this number is way lower today than the example I'm giving now. But if someone bought $100,000 January 1st, 2017, a year later, they would have had, I think it was like $896,000. So, they would have been doing pretty good had they cashed out their IRA or 401k. However, if they would have done a Roth conversion, what they would now have is slightly over $1 million. It's like $1,033,000. But one of them is a tax-free gain. One of them is a taxable gain. And so for me, I think it's more the libertarian anarchist thing to do to not give the government 10% more money and then have a tax-free gain that's legal. And then the other pushback item they get is, well, they can just confiscate your IRA or 401k. Well, if you're the one holding onto the private key, well, then how do they confiscate your private key? I mean, how do they confiscate what's in your brain? There's no way for them to confiscate a private key unless they know exactly, unless they, bust down your door, know exactly where you're hiding it. And, and maybe you have like a folder on your computer that says my private key or something, or do something stupid like that. So yeah, I mean, for me, my standpoint, yeah, they could do that whether it's in an IRA or not. So, so for me, it sort of checks off all the boxes of, yeah, I think it's, sort of the smarter way to go if you are thinking about, cashing out your IRA or 401k, don't, you can do a Roth IRA conversion and you're in a better spot than you were before and you're getting tax-free gains.
Okay. In what situations would a person want to hold their private key as compared to a situation where a person may want to let a custodian hold their private key?
I mean, I think ideally, if you know what you're doing, you probably always want to hold your private key. But for me, like, let's say you've got, a little bit of spending money on your phone or something, for that, I'm not, and even then I've got wallets on my phone where I can hold on to the private key. So maybe that's a bad example. But let's say I've got, a few $100 in this crypto on an exchange and maybe they don't have a wallet that is, on one of the, like a standard device, like a ledger or a Trezor is another one. So if you're getting maybe like a smaller cap crypto that you only have, a little bit of money in it, maybe it's not worth your time and effort and energy to get it off the exchange. But if $200 is a lot for you, then get it off the exchange. I mean, so it's as simple as that. If you don't want to, people don't go walking around, on the streets with, all their money, in their wallet. You've got, so what you want to do is make sure that you don't have funds that you can't afford to lose or don't want to lose. I would take all of that off the exchange. But then again, I work with a lot of retail people who aren't into Bitcoin and they just want me to go ahead and buy it for them. But for right now, unfortunately, there is no way to really go ahead and buy it for them, so to speak, where they hold on to the private key. And so you will be seeing, and I did mention that, hey, if you were to check this episode out in 3 years from now, it's going to be completely different. And it's probably going to be completely different 3 months from now because you've got Fidelity coming on the scene right now with different custody solutions. You've got Bakkt, BAKKT, which is actually owned by the Intercontinental Exchange, which owns the New York Stock Exchange. They're coming out with a solution. So it's going to be interesting to see what this landscape looks like. But if you don't want to lose, sort of like gold, in what circumstances would you want to hold your gold versus keeping gold in the GLD or on an exchange? So I mean, I guess it's a similar type question. And for most people, they're going to want to hold on to most of their gold physically or in a vault or somewhere that they have some sort of control over. And if you've got a little bit of trading money or here or there or some a de minimis amount compared to everything else on an exchange, and not a big deal. But don't put what you don't want to lose. Lock it up. Have a private key.
The cryptocurrencies. Who buys the cryptocurrencies? The owner of the IRA or the custodian?
So technically, the manager of the LLC is the one who's making that purchase decision, and most of the time, that manager happens to be the end user of it. And so all the custodian is custodying in this point is the LLC itself. And so then you just have to give an annual valuation as to the value at the end of the year, and that's basically all you've got to do from a compliance standpoint. You as the LLC manager are the one who's actually going ahead and buying it, and the custodian is only custodying the LLC in this case. Now, 3 months from now it might be different, where it would be really nice, to be easier if you could have the custodian where they custody the wallet, and then you've got, let's say 2 out of the 3 private keys, and that way it's your funds. In the future, that would make things a whole heck of a lot easier, because it is a rigmarole too. It's not like there's what they call a gram adjust button of, hey, let's just press this button and we go ahead and go set up a self-directed IRA LLC. It's not like you're going to E-Trade or Scottrade and making a nice easy trade. It does it does take a little bit of extra time. It does take a little bit of extra expertise to get it done, but you want to make sure you're doing things the right way.
Yeah, I know there's probably quite a few people out there thinking to themselves, hey, I have some existing Bitcoins. Can I transfer them into my crypto IRA?
Unfortunately, no. But if you are, let's say you have them at a low cost basis, like, hey, you bought it at, $1 or $500 or $400, and now you're sitting on, quite a chunk. There are different trust strategies that people can engage in at that point to make themselves a lot better off. And actually, one of the famous examples, and people don't really know this, I'm probably one of the only people that actually knows this, is that Charlie Lee of Litecoin, he created Litecoin, former Google guy, one of the Coinbase's first employees. He famously sold all of his Litecoin at the very top. If you actually look at his statement, he sold and or donated his Litecoin. And actually, I talked with him at one of these conferences, and I told him all the trust stuff I was doing and charitable trust strategies. He goes, yeah, that's actually what I did. And so when he said he sold his Litecoin, he technically sold it to an entity that he, is sort of like under his, tutelage, but he technically sold it to a different entity, got a big tax break on it. But a lot of people don't realize that actually what went on. And I heard it straight from his mouth to me.
Tim, why do you advocate holding cryptocurrencies in an IRA? Aren't crypto prices a bit volatile for retirement funds?
Yeah, and like I said before, I don't advocate anybody goes 100% into anything. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of people that want to get into this space, and most people, the only extra money they have is actually going to be in their IRAs or 401ks, and so they don't have an extra $2,000 just laying around to go ahead and do this, or an extra whatever to go ahead and do this. And so I saw people who are cashing money out of their IRAs and 401ks, and like I mentioned before, there are better ways to do this. And then, interestingly enough, there was some research by Tom Lee of Fundstrat who showed that you can add Bitcoin into a portfolio and actually see the underlying risk or the volatility actually decrease. And so what they did was they took a standard 60-40 portfolio that's 60% stock, 40% bonds, and they took the 2% that was in stocks, put it into Bitcoin. So it was 58% stocks, 2% Bitcoin, 40% bonds. And they actually saw that the volatility or the standard deviation actually decreased because it was an uncorrelated asset, whereas the returns greatly increased. And I believe that worked all the way up into 5% Bitcoin. And then they even did one example where it was 5% Bitcoin, 5% an index of the next 5 highest cryptos, I believe. And they saw even at that point, it was only moderately more volatile than the 60-40 portfolio, but the return was like triple. Now, again, past performance is no indication of future returns. It depends what, and this is a concept I speak about quite a bit. It's something called sequence of returns, where it doesn't necessarily matter what your average return is. It matters. It's more important, especially in retirement, what the order of your returns are. So I've seen examples where you have, 2 guys who both retire with $1 million. They both average the same return, but one guy had, three bad years and 7 good years, and one guy had 7 good years and 3 bad years. And the one person had, over $500,000 more than the other, even though they average the same thing, because it all has to do with, what the order of your returns are. So if you, invest, $1,000 into Bitcoin and it goes down 90%, you don't care if it averaged, whatever percent per year. If, day one, you've gotten crucified. So people do need to watch out for that sequence of return risk, especially not only on Bitcoin and everything.
Earlier, you mentioned that a lot of the cryptocurrencies, 99.5% or something like that, there are a lot of scams out there. And we've had Tone Vase on before, and he also said a lot of 99.9% coins are scammy. But I guess a natural question would be, do you advise clients on which cryptos to pick for their IRAs?
I mean, I help give them information. I mean, ultimately the decision is on theirs,
Yeah.
but I will, if they are a client of mine, I'll let them know which ones I think are going to be better, at least in my opinion. I did have a recent interview with Tone Vase as well, and actually the very first radio show that he was on was my buddy. That was the radio show that I was just on this morning right before. So this is the one. So basically, the people responsible for kind of helped launch his career. I mean, I was at an economic discussion group with that guy last night and on the radio with him this morning. And so I do have my own podcast coming out with Tone very shortly as well. So if people want to check that out.
If someone's interested to start up a crypto IRA, what's the minimum amount they would need?
I mean, you've got, so sort of like our fees get started up once you count the lawyers and everything else, I think is right around $2,000. So, obviously you don't want to start it with, $2,000 because then, you'd use up all your money in the fixed cost to get it rolling. And that's really as a loss leader. So it's not like we're making tons of money off of that. But I mean, ideally you probably want to look at, in the crypto space, you could probably justify 25,000. If you're in a normal self-directed IRA, I would say you probably want to have more closer to 50,000 US dollars, I guess, just because there are some certain fixed costs that are in there. Like some of the custodians charge certain fixed costs as well, and some of those break points start getting better at the $50,000 mark. But with something like Bitcoin, where it does have a lot more price potential appreciation than other assets, you could justify a lower amount. It's just that as you start getting down to certainly like the $5,000-$10,000 range, the fixed cost at that point started eating up what the return can be. But we do have right now, I am offering, like, if someone has over $250,000 invested with us total, I'll have this going, I guess for the next month for your guys listeners, where we're not going to charge them anything extra to set up kind of walk them through that whole process. Now they'll have to pay the lawyer fee because that has nothing to do with us. Like, I'm not going to pay your lawyer fee for you, obviously. But what I mean by the $250,000 is, let's say you've got 50,000 in Bitcoin or other cryptos, and you've got another 200,000 in other more traditional assets. We'll bundle that together to give you the $250,000 break point. And that's probably going to be going up soon. So that is something you do want to, jump on, because, as we're getting busier and busier, I was setting these up for free at the end of last year, just to kind of get like the dummy, the test dummies in and figure out, and everything went fine, smooth. But, obviously, the first time you do something versus, the 100th time, it's a lot easier the 100th time. But what we have discovered is that there are a lot of steps to go through, and yeah, you could do it yourself and do it a lot cheaper. But, if it takes you, 9 months to figure it out, and then the price goes from 3,500 to, 8,000, but you did it yourself and saved a little bit of money. It's time is money, and how much of this time do you want to spend doing it yourself, and then do you want to, at the end of the day, chance messing up something, because to talk to these lawyers on a consulting basis is not not necessarily cheap. So there's not a lot of good resources, but you guys can head to the libertyadvisor.com or innovativewealth.com, where you can get tons of information on all things self-directed IRA and cryptocurrency related.
Okay, great. We appreciate that. One more question, and then I'm gonna give a link for people to come and visit you. But what impact would a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis have on a crypto IRA?
Well, sort of as I alluded to before, I think that you will see during the next financial crisis, and since crypto is a risk asset, I do expect like risk assets to have the price actually go down. But then eventually I see a policy response being, hey, we're going to quote unquote save everything. Here's, a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus plan, or Ocasio-Cortez, stupid Green New Deal plan of, let's just see who can have a more outrageous type plan. I mean, I saw Elizabeth Warren the other day had a $100 trillion spending plan. And it's just, at this point, like, I hate all politicians, but it's just like so ridiculous the situation we're getting into. So I see the response to the crisis being a catalyst, not necessarily the crisis. And it's always, it's hard to predict. I mean, if you were, let's say you had inside info on on Moody's when Moody's decided they would downgrade the S&P, or I forgot who it was, either Moody's or S&P was going to downgrade the U.S. debt. I think it was like August 3rd, 2011. If you had insider info that was going to happen, what you would do is you'd probably, you want to sell bonds. You'd probably want to buy gold, because you're thinking, okay, well, now the U.S. credit is going to be downgraded, so there's less chance that they're going to be able to pay us back, which means we need a higher risk premium to hold on to that, to their bonds, or to their, IOU monopoly money that they're printing off. But what happened is people did the opposite, and they invested more heavily into bonds, and they did the exact opposite that you would expect. And so sometimes you could even have all the information potentially ahead of time, and you would have made the wrong move because the bond yields actually went down, and so the people holding on to bonds actually made more money, whereas common sense would dictate that the opposite would occur. And so we're in this really weird dichotomy where all the bad news is good news and all the good news is bad news. And I came out with a presentation January 2017. It's online. You guys can find it, called The Trump Effect and Why Good News is Bad News. And the entire premise is that he would do things to game the stock market, and then that would be, good news. Then all the good news would mean that the Fed would now not have any excuses not to raise rates. The raising of the rates would then lead to, interest rates going up, which would then be quote unquote bad news. And so now you're seeing that there was a lot of bad news that was coming out because the rates did start going up. And now because there was so much bad news coming out, it meant that the Fed just yesterday backtracked and said that they're going to end their quantitative tightening program. They're going to, not raise rates again, probably for the rest of the year. Europe's probably going to start their quantitative easing program again. And so you've seen this whole perfect storm that was coming together that I first started talking about over a year ago. And this whole perfect storm is then unraveled now, and they've backtracked everything. And so now it's good news. So now it's the bad news is now good news. And so we live in this weird twilight zone where, it's so hard to predict what's going on. So what we've done over at Innovative Wealth is we have portfolios where we have a small amount of our clients' portfolios into put options that we did before everything started going down. So, anyone could say that after the fact. We have videos where we were stating this, right before. I made the video the day before the market started going down. You couldn't be any better from a timing standpoint. And so, let's say the market crashes 50%, that could be an option. Then your put options would then explode in value, and now you'd walk away, probably only being down a few percent. Whereas if, the other scenario occurs and, behind door number 2 is a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of some sorts, and now the stock market goes to infinity, then we own those underlying assets as well. So what we're really trying to manage is that sequence of return right now, because we're in this really crazy time period. I do not think that will be a winning strategy forever. So, nobody knows exactly how it's going to play out, but we're sort of in a way where as long as it's not flat, I think we're going to win. And then if everybody's down 50 and you're down, 5, 6, 7, 8%, and you get to buy everything half off, that's not a bad thing either. But it's just managing that sequence, knowing how much you can spend in retirement, having a plan, and don't just go and hobble a whole bunch of products together, then try to figure out a plan. Have a plan, and then try to figure out what's the best way to hit that. I've got a recent podcast with Tom Hegna, who's probably the retirement guru. And, I'd recommend people watch that. I've got tons of stuff on different Bitcoin related topics, and coming up with Tone Vays is an interview we just did recently that hasn't been released yet. So a lot of good material at thelibertyadvisor.com where you guys can, everything. So my Liberty Advisor show is more of like a pro Bitcoin Peter Schiff type podcast. And then you've got my Crypto Wealth show, which is all things crypto related. Because some people were like, hey, I want to hear you for the stock market stuff, not the crypto. Some people are like, hey, I want to hear you from the crypto, not the stock market. So I should have said, like, screw you guys, it's my show, I'll talk about whatever I want to, but I ended up bifurcating them. So I hope that answered your questions.
Okay. Well, I think if we think things are crazy now, wait until 16-year-olds vote for our politicians. But Tim, before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know more about what you do and where they can find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me at thelibertyadvisor.com. Like I mentioned before, I do have some content that I put out on a pretty regular basis. Also, help advise people through these retirement waters. So, whether it's, just investing in your portfolio or whether it's, giving you actual guidance. And I do have different packages depending on how much people have invested with me. And right now I am small enough where, I can still, all the calls that are coming in, people, who are investing with us are talking with me. Whereas, if you see this, a year from now, that's not necessarily going to be the case because we are ramping up, it is growing, luckily exponentially. Luckily for my wife, because I did make a pretty big move when I'm like, hey, I'm just going to quit our 6-figure job here, residual income. It's quite the move to make, but, I don't like being stymied. I don't like being told what I can and can't talk about. So if you want to have, an honest truth about what's going on from, a libertarian Austrian economic perspective, from a guy that, I was one of the youngest people in America to pass the certified financial planner exam. I was, had the Series 7 at 22, which actually I just recently gave up. So that way FINRA couldn't tell me what I can't talk about. And so, you're getting, I'm probably one of the most outspoken advisors there are. I've called out a lot of different situations correctly, including running the endowment fund that lost the least amount of money in 2008. When like I mentioned, I did graduate in 2008, but the guys that inherited my fund ended up having the best track record because I had vetoed the decision. I moved all the financial assets into cash beforehand which was not an easy decision to make in late 2007, 2008. I got chewed out for everybody. So if you guys want, good advice, or at least what I appear to be good, there's tons of you can Google my name. There's pages and pages of stuff. I've got, I'm not afraid to put it out there. So you can basically audit me the past, 2 years of the podcast and see, hey, is this guy really, is he just, a stopped clock? Is he just, saying things after the fact? And I'm not. So you can go back, past 2.5 years, go through everything I've said and audit me and do your own due diligence, do your work. And so I can help people out all along the spectrum. You got rich off Bitcoin. I've got crypto strategies for that. You got rich off, a penny stock, and now it's worth $1 gazillion. We got strategies for that. Want crypto in an IRA. You want alternative assets. We can help with that. You're just your standard guy out there with $500,000. You want to make sure that you can retire and not run out of money. We can help you with that. So, I tried building a practice built around more of the Liberty community, because most financial advisors are too afraid to say what I'm saying, and because they want to just appear very vanilla, and they don't want to offend anybody. Well, if you just want to stick around long enough, you'll eventually get offended by me. But for right now, it's just telling the truth. It's exposing how the Fed works and making sure that people are in a position not to lose money and to be able to live out their retirement with making sure that they can keep up their standard of living and keep up the purchasing power.
Tim Picciott, we thank you for coming on SBTV, and we'll be sure to send people your way. We'll put the links up, and we appreciate the time that you've given us.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. It was a pleasure to be on, and would be glad to be on in the future.
That was Tim Picciott from The Liberty Advisor. To find out more about Tim's work, please visit thelibertyadvisor.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content, and do also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.